Christopher Nolan has said that, like it or not, J. Robert Oppenheimer is the most important person who ever lived. And regardless of who agrees, I know I'm not the only one who has been profoundly impacted by Nolan's new film, Oppenheimer. It's one of the most despairing movies I've ever seen. I saw it a second time and I'm finding it only marginally easier to review. A movie so dense and larger than life. Paul Schrader called it the most important film of the century. I actually didn't come out of it thinking that it was a masterpiece either time, and yet I can't stop thinking about it in like this really intense way. So I'm going to earnestly try and reconcile the magnitude and urgency of what this film is about and the actual movie. And this will be a spoiler discussion. Yes, it's a historical biopic, but I totally think that you can spoil things about the structure and specifics. So proceed with caution, and please let me know what you think of Oppenheimer if you've seen it, guys. But where to even begin? J. Robert Oppenheimer's story is one very devoid of answers. It's full of complicated ethics and inevitabilities, and ultimately defined by one of the greatest atrocities ever committed by the human race, the invention of the atomic bomb and the use of it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Oppenheimer is adapted from the book American Prometheus and is above all else a character study of Oppenheimer and what we can kind of observe through his experience. And it's one of those movies where you can't start thinking too much about what characters are saying, or you'll miss the next thing that they're saying, because every single line of dialogue is used by Christopher Nolan as part of the puzzle. This film is kind of a collection of moments in Oppenheimer's life, from when he first is introduced to quantum physics all the way to decades after the bomb was invented. There's a lot included about his communist associations, his resentment towards Hitler as a Jewish man as a motivation to build the bomb, and then the haunting reality of how little he reconsiders things when Hitler dies, how little anyone reconsiders using it when it became clear that it wasn't necessary to end the war. I mean, it's deeply, deeply nuanced, and I think it's very impressive how Nolan juggles a lot of different parts of a very complicated man while also keeping focus on the bigger picture. There are moments in this that are so harrowing and direct, and then ones that have so many political and historical and psychological implications that you could spend hours unpacking a single scene. And I think it's at its best when Nolan feels really urgent and desperate to get us to think about why this happened and the world that we live in now because of it. I think this might have one of the best endings of all time when we finally find out what Oppenheimer said to Einstein. Remember when I told you when we set this bomb off, we could technically start a chain reaction and destroy the world? I believe that we did. Albert Einstein's role in this film is shockingly so insanely important, because Oppenheimer at the beginning is saying that Einstein's math is a thing of the past, and ultimately we see that Einstein just wanted no part of this future. He had learned what Oppenheimer would years later, and it's a really sad look at history repeating itself and that question of whether the pride of man can ever be stopped. Will we ever learn our lesson, or will we just make a bigger bomb? I'm just rambling, but I find this stuff really, really depressing, and I personally don't think that we'll ever learn our lesson, and I think that at least in this point in his filmmaking career, Christopher Nolan agrees with me. But back to the film itself, the structure here is really important. Nolan uses this framing device of two hearings. You have Oppenheimer's life in a sort of biopic form, then you have this hearing for renewing his security clearance, where he's really pressured about his associations with communists and the Manhattan Project, and the black and white scenes of Robert Downey Jr.'s Louis Strauss, his hearing for the Secretary of Commerce position. In classic Nolan fashion, it's told out of order. Louis Strauss's trial is meant to represent the objective truth, or at least that storyline, and Oppenheimer's sections are in color to represent that it's his subjective point of view. And that allows for some of my favorite moments in the film, where Nolan really plays with the surreal and puts us inside of Oppenheimer's head with scenes that feel straight out of a horror movie. When he's suddenly naked in his security clearance hearing, and especially when he's feigning patriotism and indifference to an animalistic, bloodthirsty crowd, and this one heart-stopping, piercing scream comes through, and he's in a walking nightmare, no longer being able to distinguish the cheers from the screams, coming to terms with what he's done. There's even this blink and you'll miss it detail of a gloved hand pushing Jean Tatlock's head into the bathtub in his flash of her very tragic suicide to indicate his feelings of guilt and paranoia about being followed and not being there for her, but also because it was believed by some that she was actually murdered. The Trinity test scene is also so well executed, and I've seen a lot of different ways people have qualified that scene, like my heart was beating out of my chest, and I personally don't think I had that experience. I mean, you know how it's gonna go, and I think I just found it really sad. It's the bleak path playing out the moment this obscene power becomes real, only to be followed by Oppenheimer being celebrated and hoisted into the air in front of the American flag. I think there's something to be said about this movie and Dune, but we won't get into that right now. I know I'm not alone in this either, but I think I definitely have some qualms with the third section of this film, and I'm really upset about it because there is definitely something to having the third section of this film be what it is. It's the fulfillment of the Prometheus quote, the one the film begins with. This is his punishment for harnessing the power of the atomic bomb. There's a lot of good going on, but I just couldn't talk myself out of thinking that the structure or maybe the busyness of it all failed the pacing a little bit. The parts in that section that do really stand out though are Emily Blunt's Kitty testifying in his security clearance hearing, when Oppenheimer visits Gary Oldman as President Truman, and the end, of course, with Albert Einstein. Just incredible stuff. Unfortunately, I also can't jump on the Robert Downey Jr. bandwagon. I don't know why, and I'm sorry. He's a terrific actor, and I do think that he's very good here, but I thought he was actually one of the less interesting performances in the film. To be fair, there are like 24 career best performances in this movie, so it's not the worst thing to fit right in here. And I wouldn't be mad if he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but there are so many astonishing supporting performances. Matt Damon as Leslie Groves, Dane DeHaan I thought was perfect, Kenneth Branagh, Jason Clarke, Alden Ehrenreich is terrific, Benny Safdie was so sweaty, Josh Hartnett is in his comeback era, Tom Conti as Albert Einstein maybe was my favorite. I can't say I loved Florence Pugh, but that is not her fault. It's because she's straight up just not written well. I am not buying the, oh, it's from Oppenheimer's POV. I found it really sad to discover that Jean Tatlock was a Stanford graduate and a child psychologist and potentially a lesbian, and this was the most we could do. I did think Emily Blunt was much better. Not perfect, she was still a wildly interesting person beyond her portrayal here, but her performance as Kitty is amazing, and I thought you could really feel their importance to one another and what she brought to his life. And of course, Cillian Murphy is fucking phenomenal. I really don't think I even need to say that. He is a movie star, and he's certainly able to sell being very, very troubled. He's a genius, but he's a womanizer and an egotist. He's interested in the truth, but avoids responsibility. The character is really brought to life both by his performance and Nolan's writing. I won't spend too much time on the technical aspects either, because you're gonna be hearing the same thing everywhere. It's phenomenal. Nolan's visual filmmaking, the cinematography, Ludwig Göransson's score, the sound design is really crucial in certain moments. Ruth de Jong, the set designer, did an incredible job. Jennifer Lame was the editor. That might be the most impressive aspect here in the way that the story is told. I think how much you understand it or how much you pick up on will vary depending on how much information you're entering the movie with. Like, I did a lot of research in between my two watches, and it was interesting like how much I was able to piece together on the second watch. But regardless, because of the editing, it is shockingly coherent despite how much information is being communicated. But to sum up my thoughts, I don't think that Oppenheimer has nothing in common with your typical historical biopic, and this is tackling something so big that I think it's almost impossible to cover everything you would want and do everything justice. But in the grand scheme of things, it's easily one of the best movies that we've ever gotten in this genre. It just does so much well and clearly leaves an impact beyond the theater. So I'm going to give Oppenheimer 4.5 out of 5 stars. I concede, I gave it 4 stars after my first watch, but I think this movie deserves it. All the little nitpicks seem so insignificant compared to what Nolan was able to accomplish, not just technically here, but on a much, much deeper level. Though it is the point that the people in this film were emotionally removed and blind to these things, we don't have to be. So let me know your thoughts on Oppenheimer, guys. It is also just crazy that everyone and their mother is going to see this and out to see Barbie. They are both very timely in very different ways, and this is just a special moment, so I'm excited to hear what you guys think. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.